Hello students, I am Arun Devkar, Assistant Professor, ASSMS College of Water Management and Catering Technology. Let us start with a new chapter on energy flow in ecosystem, food chain, food web and ecological succession. Food chain, we are going to discuss the first topic called food chain and food webs. Introduction, every ecosystem works in a systematic manner under natural conditions. It receives energy from the sun and passes it to a various biotic components. All ecosystems have a feeding hierarchy which start with the energy sources, for example the sun, and then followed by the producer, consumer and decomposer. These components are dependent on another. One of the important feature is presence of grazing and distress food chain and food webs. In grazing food chains and food webs, green plants, for example producer, synthesize food from non-living nutrients with the help of the sunlight in the process of the photosynthesis. For example, animals consume plants and other animals get nutrients and energy. When plants and animal dies and decay, or when animals extract waste, bacteria and fungi feed on the dead or the waste material and releases the nutrition back into the water or soil for reuses by the producer, but the energy is used or lost at every step of the food chain or food webs. In the distress food chain or food webs, the energy comes from dead organic matter instead of the green producers. Therefore, the flow of the energy and nutrients takes place through food chain and food webs, which becomes the lifeline of the ecosystem. Food chain. Now we are going to discuss food chain. The transfer of food energy through a sequence of eating and being eaten by the organism in an ecosystem is termed as the food chain. For example, in the grassland ecosystem, grass fixes the light energy from the sun into the chemical energy via systematic of the food and eaten up by the grasshoppers, which in turns is eaten by a frog, and the frog itself is eaten up a snake. So grass is a food for grasshoppers. Grasshopper is food for frogs and the frog is food for snakes. Thus, grasshoppers, frogs and snakes make a food chain through which energy contained in food is transferred from one organism to another organism. In a pond ecosystem, the big fishes eat the small fishes, which eat the zooplankton, which in turns consume the fish. The latter fixes the light energy from the sun into the chemical energy. All the organisms, whether live or dead, are potential food for other organisms. So initially there is no waste in an ecosystem. Therefore, there is a definite sequence of producer and consumer in the ecosystem, and their interaction along with the population size are expressed together as trophic structure. The position of organism along a food chain is referred to as an trophic level, and the amount of living matter at each trophic level at a given time is known as standing crops or standing biomass. All the green plants that are primary producer belong to the first trophic level. Plant eaters or herbivores that are primary consumer belongs to the second trophic level. Carnivores or secondary consumer to the third trophic level, and other carnivores are territory consumer to the fourth trophic levels, and so on. The trophic carnivores in the food chain are also known as top predator. Level provide the framework for studying energy flow and efficiency as well as for the cascading trophic interaction. They are based on the functions of the species, not on the taxonomic position. However, a species can occupy more than one trophic level as in the above given example of food chain. An eagle acts as a top predator and occupy fifth trophic level, whereas food chain eagle tends to be a secondary consumer level occupying the third level. Further, the feeding habits of the juvenile animal and consequently its trophic level can change as it grew up. Energy transfer efficiency limits food chain length. Energy is transferred between trophic level in the form of the energy. When one organism eat another in the ecosystem, there is approximately 80 to 90% loss of the energy at each transfer. When energy enters a trophic level, some of it is stored as an biomass. As a part of organism body, this is the energy available to the next trophic level, since only energy stored as an biomass can get eaten. As a rule of thumb, only about 10% of the energy stored as an biomass in one trophic level per unit time ends up stored as an biomass. In the next trophic level, the some unit time, this is 10% rule of the energy transfer in the ecosystem. This pattern of fractional transfer limits the length of the food chain after a certain number of trophic levels. Generally 3 to 6, there is too little energy flow to support a population at a higher level. Therefore, the shorter the food chain or nearer the organism to the producer trophic level, greater will be at the energy available at that pollution. Types of food chains. Now we are going to discuss 5 types of food chain. Food chains are of 2 basic types. The first one is grazing food chain. The grazing food chain is a major food chain dominantly occurring in ecosystem. As obvious from the name, the start from the green plants, the major sources of energy for this chain is taken from the sun, as a plant carry out of the process of the photosynthesis. In this process, in the presence of sunlight, the green plants are the primary producer and eaten by the herbivores, which in turns are eaten by a carnivores. This food chain doesn't consist of microbes or other decomposer. It is carried out by the microscopic organism. Distress food chain. The distress food chain start with the dead organic matter such as dead bodies of the animal, of fallen leaves, which are eaten by microorganism and then followed by the distress feeding organism and their predators. This food chain has the remains of the distress as the major sources of energy, and this process gets completed by the subsoil organism, which can either be microscopic. These food chains are less dependent on direct solar energy. Unlike the grazing food chain, distress food chain produce a large amount of energy to the atmosphere. This type of food chain ensure maximum utilization and maximum wastage of the available material. It is useful in the fixation of inorganic nutrition and utilizing up to the maximum. For example, the food chain operating in the decomposing accumulated litter in a temperate forest ecosystem is distress food chain. Now we are going to discuss the topic called food webs. In nature, the food chain never exists as isolated in a sequence. Rather, they are interconnected to form a network called food webs. Therefore, a food webs can be defined as a network of food chain interconnected to each other so that number of options of eating and being eaten are available at the each trophic level. Now we're going to discuss types of food webs. Food webs instrument the link or connection among the species in an ecosystem, but these connections may be differ in their importance in terms of energy flow and dynamic of species population. Some trophic relationships are more important than other in detecting how energy flow through ecosystem. Some connections are more influential on species population change. Now the first one is contendence webs. These food webs depict feeding leaking among the species in a food webs. These are also called topological food webs. These depict only the presence of the absence of a trophic interaction. They, however, do not show the strength of the interaction nor any changes in trophic relationship. For the above reason, tropical webs are sometimes referred to a static food webs. Now we're going to discuss second point, that is energy flow webs. These quantifying energy flow from one species to another species. The connections between populations and are quantified on the basis of flux of energy between sources and its consumer. In these food webs, the thickness of an arrow reflects the strength of the relationship. Third food webs, that is functional food webs. These food webs represent the importance of each species in maintaining the integrity of the community and reflect influences on the growth rate of the other species populations. Now we're going to discuss characteristics of food webs. Food webs involves much more than who eats whom, an effect known as reward feedback. When a downstream organism in an energy flow has a positive effect on its upstream food supply. Say for example, a consumer does something that sustains the survival of its food sources is known as reward feedback. Food webs describe directly and indirectly species interaction in a community. All species in the food webs are related to each other and different trophic levels. Different organism may occupy some trophic level. All species in the food webs can be distinguished into a basal species, that is autotrophs such as plants, intermediate species herbivorous, and intermediate level carnivores such as grasshoppers and scorpions. Food webs also can be used to instrument indirect and interaction among species. Generally, two types of effective occur when the interaction between two species are influenced by a third species. If we manipulate one species in a food webs, it may be change the population of species that neither eat or nor are eaten by the multiple species. These effects include trophic cascade, where predator enhance producer growth by feeding on a consumer species. Trophic cascade, in a prey-predator relationship, predator can impact both prey and abundance and behavior. Keystone predation. Robert Payne, as an experiment study conducted in the Rocky Initial Zone, has demolished that predation can influence the competition amongst the species in a food webs. Significance of food chains. Now we're going to discuss significance of food chains. First one, the food chains and food webs helps understand the feeding relationship and the interaction between organism in an ecosystem. Second point, Nutrient cycle and energy flow in an ecosystem takes place through food chain and food webs. Third point, food chain keep a check on a population size of different organism. For example, in a food chain in grassland, if deer population increases, there will be a more food for the carnivores. There is population will be increases, which in turns will reduce the deer population. If there are less deers, some of the carnivores will serve and die, letting the deer's population to grow. Food webs are very important in maintaining the stability of an ecosystem in nature. In a linear food chain, if one species become extinct or one species suffer, then the species in the subsequent topic levels are also affected in food webs. On the other hand, there are number of options available at each topic level. So if one species is affected, it does not affect other topic level so seriously. Now we're going to discuss next point, that is ecological succession. Ecological succession is a process through which ecosystem tend to change over a period of time. Succession can be related to a seasonal environment changes which is created change in the community of plants and animals living in the ecosystem. Other successional events may take much longer period of time, extending to several decades. If a forest is cleared, it is initially colonized by a certain group of species of plant and animals, which gradually change throughout an orderly process of community development. One can predict that an opened up area will gradually be converted into a grassland, a shrubland, and final woodland and a forest if permitted to do so without human interference. There is a tendency of succession to produce a more or less stable state at the end of the successional stage. Development stages in the ecosystem thus consist of a pioneer stage, a series of changes known as serial stage, and final a climax stage. The successive stages are related to the way in which energy flow through the biological system. The most frequently example of succession changes occur in a pond ecosystem, where it fluctuates from a dry terrestrial habitat to the early colonization, a macho adequate ecosystem, and then revert back to its dry stages in summer, where its adequate life remains dominant. Summary for this chapter: the transfer of food energy through a sequence of eating and being eaten by the organism in an ecosystem is termed as the food chain. Next point, the position of organism along a food chain is referred to as a trophic level. Next point, energy transfer efficiency limits food chain length. The shorter the food chain or nearer the organism to the producer trophic level, greater will be the energy available at that population. Grazing food chain start from the green plants. The major sources of energy for this chain is taken from the sun, as the plants carry out the process of photosynthesis in the presence of sunlight. The distress food chain start from the dead organic matter, such as dead bodies of the animal or fallen leaves of tree plants, which are eaten by the microorganisms and then followed by the distress feeding organism and their predator. Thank you.